Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing? Did you all just get back from a walk shop? Make some noise if you had a great walk shop just now. Yeah? Awesome. I want to take a moment and give a special shout out to everyone who helped make those walk shops possible. There was a lot of behind the scenes work that went into those. Dozens of folks, speakers, guides, volunteers, walk shop leads. If you helped with a walk shop, actually, will you stand and be recognized so we can give you a round of applause? Awesome. Those walk shops really are the heart of the conference, so thank you all for your work on those. I'm Corinne Kistner. I'm the Deputy Director of NACTO, and really thrilled to see so many new and familiar faces here this week. The NACTO conference is such a renewing source of energy and inspiration for me and many others, and it's really incredibly fulfilling to see this community grow year after year. You heard from Jeanette on Monday that there are 125 different cities and transit agencies represented here this week, and that's truly a movement, so thank you all for being here. Today I'm honored to introduce the afternoon plenary, Streets for All Ages. At NACTO, we believe strongly in the principle that streets are public spaces, places for us to move through and linger in, corridors for walking and biking and transit, as well as spaces for rest, for eating with friends, for bumping into neighbors, for art and aesthetic joy, for exploration and play, and importantly, for people of all ages. On Sunday, many of us biked and walked in Celebrate LA. Let's give a round of applause if you were at Celebrate LA. Woo! On Sunday, it was awesome. And we experienced there firsthand what it feels like to be in a space designed for joy and celebration and learning and community. I even overheard a kid say, "This is the best day of my life," which is awesome. So how do we infuse that feeling into the everyday? And how do we blur the line between indoor and outdoor space, bringing individual experiences and personal development into the shared public realm? So I think we can all agree that we support safe and vibrant streets, but what does it really mean to design streets for people of all ages? Today we're going to hear from 5 fabulous speakers who are thinking about people in all stages of life, from early childhood development to our teenage years, to the role of parent and caretaker, to the needs of older adults, and the way that these stages intersect and overlap. How does having playful streets benefit not only children, but older adults too? How does designing for strollers and wheelchairs make it easier for everyone to get around? And how can we counteract social isolation by designing streets that foster connections for people in all stages of life? So importantly, this conversation must begin with consideration of the earliest years of a child's life. So it's very fitting that we first hear from Cecilia Vaca-Jones, Program Director at the Bernard Van Leer Foundation. Cecilia traveled here from the Netherlands, where the Bernard Van Leer Foundation is incorporating a focus on early childhood development into the planning and management of cities. So please join me in welcoming Cecilia to the stage.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to be in my second NACTO conference. I was here last year. And my first time in LA, and I must say I'm very well impressed with everything that's happening in the city, especially because I think cities are the most amazing place to promote social equality and social equity. And I must say that I'm very well impressed, and this is my first time in LA, and I must say that I'm very happy to see how things are moving in order to promote equity. And I do believe, and I truly believe, that cities represent a unique opportunity to promote a good and fair start for all children. And that's what we're trying to show in the Bernard Van Leer Foundation. I'm living in the Netherlands, but I originally come from Ecuador. So I'll tell you a little bit about what we're doing, but today I want to share with you some ideas on how we can help improve the way young kids, and I'm talking about babies and their caregivers, live, interact, connect, and basically enjoy the public space. And how, by doing things better at a city level, we can basically reassure a good development for all children. So let me share with you some scientific evidence. Early experiences shape brain architecture. You see the picture on your left represents the real brain of a baby that has been completely neglected. that has basically been exposed to a very negative and stressful environment. Well, the picture on your right represents the real picture of the brain of a baby that has been stimulated, that has been exposed to a very positive and nurturing care environment. I don't know how many of you know that during the first 1,000 days of life, we make up to 1 million connections per second. And these connections represent the opportunities that shape our behaviors and health the rest of our life. So please keep in mind this important information when you're building streets. So if we want to reassure a good and fair start for all children, we should start thinking better on how we can better support pregnant women. A good start represents that we can help children develop their full potential, but it also represents an opportunity to help build societies that are peaceful, creative, and also very thriving. Every city I go around the world has great public space. I can find this kind of public space almost in every city I've been around the world. These places, of course, promote play, connections, creativity, and they're good for children. But unfortunately, these kind of places are very limited to a very small percentage of the population. This is the public space that's more common in most of our cities. This is a real picture that I took in Sao Paulo, but this could be any American city or any African city or any Latin American city around the world. So I think that we're building streets that stimulate cars and not stimulate children. And what's the problem with this when you're thinking from early childhood development perspective? It's not the long time we spend commuting from one place to another, which also represents that we're spending less time with our children and families. But what's actually bad about this mobility model is air pollution. There's more and more evidence that air pollution is killing babies before they're born. So when we're designing a street, why don't we start thinking about what's happening in the brain of young babies? Do we want to promote a healthy brain development? So this is what I want to talk about today. If you could experience the city from 95 centimeters, which I think it's around 37 inches, the height of a 3 healthy-year-old child, what would you change? What would you do different? What I love about NACTO conference is that you have real practitioners hands-on doing things and changing things on the field. What would you do different? What would you change? In the Werner von Leer Foundation, we truly think that if we can make a city be a successful city for young children, this can become a successful city for all different stages in life. And during these last 2 years, we've been gathering important information of cost-effective policies, programs, projects that are working around the world in 4 very strategic areas: green public space, mobility for families, parenting support, and data-driven decision-making. But today, I just want to share a couple of ideas with you because I have very short time. I only have 7 minutes. And I want to share some ideas of what I would do if I would be the mayor of Quito, which is my original home city. The first thing I would do is I would recuperate all public space, and I would make public space that can work for positive interactions between caregivers and babies, and between caregivers, children, and nature. Contact with nature is very important during early childhood periods. I would also try to reduce the isolation and stress of families. Families all over the world are completely stressed, and raising children is a stressful activity. So we need to make public space a nice place where people can meet, can talk, can interact, can play, can have fun. And why not? Let's do like Tel Aviv mayor is doing now. Why don't we use public space to do some storytelling? Storytelling is one of the most positive activities you can do in order to promote language for young children. This is what they're already doing in Tel Aviv in Israel, and it's very low cost, very high impact. Or why don't we start planting a tree for every newborn baby that we have in the city? This is what mayors from Tirana, Wales, and Rotterdam are already doing, and they're making their cities become greener and greener. Or what about what most cities in the northern part of Europe do in a regular basis, in a very systematic way? They just close up streets so children and families can play, can use the public space, their public space, can recuperate streets as the best public space to meet. Of course, if I'm talking about mobility, I would emphasize on biking. These are real pictures. On your left, you have a picture in Quito, and basically this represents a group of women biking. If you want to have a biking culture, it's not just about the biking lanes. It's about modifying behaviors. And what's happening in many cities is that we find out that women don't know how to bike. And women are the main caregivers in every city. So if we want to promote biking, we need to start making sure that women know how to bike. On your right, this is a picture I took Sunday in LA. I was very happy to see all the bikes around the city. What was interesting is I went there to make pictures of babies, and I found more families riding their dogs, and very few would dare to ride their babies. So I was a bit worried because this also represents that we need to do something to change these behaviors. We need people to want biking. So if we want to use bike lanes, if we want to have like an amazing biking culture like in the Netherlands, we need people to start biking. We also want to have safe roads, and this is what Mexico is doing really well. They're just like reassuring that kids can have safe crossings all over the city. They're doing it in different cities that we're currently working in. Bhubaneswar in India is also a great example and champion of what you can do in order to create safe crossings. On your right, you have a beautiful mural. This is Bogota. And the storytelling I was telling you about can happen in a regular basis in a park, in a public space, but you can also tell stories through art, through culture. Of course, I want to make transport as safe as possible. This is a real picture of what Dhaka, a city in Bangladesh, is currently doing. They're reassuring that some spaces in the public transport can be safe for young children and women. So remember, usually this kind of public transport is very crowded, so we want to make sure that this space is very safe, especially for young children and women. For me, of course, one of the most important things is that all people have access to affordable and good quality of services, but especially the most vulnerable, and especially we're talking about health services. We need to make sure that if we want to make people healthy in a city, they also need to access services, and services should be close to their homes. This is a great idea. It was inspired in Boston Basics, which was socio-ecological saturation of messages. And this is what Sao Paulo replicated a couple of months ago. They took like 5 key messages on different behaviors that have a great impact to raise positive development in children. This is a very cost-effective way of sharing information and sharing good practices of what can work for raising your children. And finally, one of the key things that I think I would do if I would ever have the chance to become a mayor is the use of accurate data that relates to the very young stages of life. Usually cities manage a lot of information, but usually it's very difficult to manage information about young children. So we need to make sure that we know where young children are, and we also need to make sure on how they're doing. And depending on this, I can decide where I want to have like bigger interventions, and I can decide where I have the biggest gaps of services or where we're having more danger for these children to grow in a very positive and stimulating environment. If you want to learn more about different experiences, please check our recent publications. We have many publications. But I just want to finish with one last slide because I think this is going to be our biggest challenge as cities. We will be receiving lots of young kids from different humanitarian crises, either because of conflict or environmental disasters. And I think that we as cities need to think together what we want to do with these young children, how we want to make our cities thriving places where children can grow and have an exciting life. I want to live in a city where I can sleep home and I can leave outside. I want to live in a city where I can sleep home and I can go outside and see children playing in the streets. This is what I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia, for that perspective. I think that's, that reminder to focus on the first 1,000 days and all the connections that our brains form in that time, and thinking about the 95 centimeters and the view of the city from that perspective is really important. So next up, I'm delighted to introduce my colleague, Skye Duncan. Skye is the director of the Global Designing Cities Initiative at NACTO, where she's been leading a multi-year program funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies to develop the new Global Street Design Guide, and to provide technical assistance to cities around the world on safe and sustainable street design. Now, Skye and the Global Designing Cities Initiative at NACTO are producing a supplement to that guide focused on designing streets for kids, and I'm thrilled to welcome Skye to the stage to share more about that work.
Fabulous, thank you. Thanks, Cecilia, that was awesome. I love seeing these presentations to kick us off. I will not touch the microphone, don't worry. As Corinne said, I'm going to talk today a bit about Streets for Kids, which is an early project that we're just starting, and we'd love to have your involvement. I think most of you probably know, Corinne mentioned, our program was launched about 4 years ago by Jeanette Sadikan, and one of our biggest projects at the start was to produce a global street design guide. We, of course, pulled from expertise from in this room and all over the world to pull best practices from over 40 countries and 70 cities. And we also kind of emulated the model in the North American model with the endorsements. And so we've currently got over 35 cities and 25 organizations who have also put their name towards a people-first approach to street design. Jeanette showed these. We're also incredibly excited that we're now increasing awareness around this material through translations. And the basis of this, like a lot of the NACTO guides, is really looking at what's possible, right? How do we take our existing infrastructure and ask how we can transform that to better serve our citizens and to invert that outdated hierarchical pyramid where the car has been king, and instead to put people first and prioritize sustainable mobility options and delivery of goods and city services, and when we have the space, give it to private automobiles. So we're very excited that with the Streets for Kids project now, that we will be creating this supplement, but then also not having it as something that sits on the shelf, but then providing technical assistance to city governments to actually implement projects and collect metrics to build towards the global evidence base of these types of strategies. To really look at how do we make sure that our streets are safe and accessible fundamentally, that they're also healthy and comfortable, and of course, opportunities for inspiration and education in our street public realm. We want to make sure we're complementing what's out there, so like we've done in the past, we've created a global network, advisory committees, experts. We have the idea to pull projects and policies and programs from around the world, collate that and showcase that. So we would love to, we're still in the process, it's early days, so if you'd love to be involved, please go to the website and join us for this process. Now, you guys know in this audience that our streets are our largest network of public space, right? And in an ideal world, of course, these are places that we can run and kids can play, they can learn to ride a bicycle or get to school safely. But sadly, we've actually been failing our kids in how we have been designing our streets. We've created environments where people have to risk their lives on a daily basis to get to school or to get to work. And I have this like horrifically large collection of photographs like this from every corner of the world. And it's just devastating to see that we are making design decisions that are failing our next generation in literally every corner, not only around the world, but here in the US as well. So we know that we have close to 200,000 kids, just under 5, dying prematurely from air pollution every year. We now know, the study came out last week, that we're fighting air pollutants in mothers' placentas. So as Cecilia very clearly mentioned, the earliest of stages in the health of the pregnant mother is so important. But we also have over 40 million kids around the world who are obese or overweight, who are going to have shorter life expectancies. We have hundreds of thousands of kids that don't have access to clean water and sanitation and the basics that our streets are often so often providing us. And we have more than 500 kids a day dying on our streets. 500 a day. Here in LA, as Salida mentioned the other day, it's also the leading cause of death for kids aged 2 to 14. So, our hope is that through this work, we can start to come up with the very practical tools and strategies to make sure we're not making those same mistakes. So I mentioned we're in the process. We've started looking initially at what defines a child through all the different kinds of definitions out there, and we've come up with this 6-user group that we will be using as kind of a lens through the work as we continue development. And to look at how we can see opportunities to make connections, as Cecilia said, not only in the neurons of the baby and the mother's while she's pregnant, but also between child and caregiver, between children, between caregivers themselves for social isolation, but also looking at our relationship with our public space immediately around us and how we get to our destinations. So of course, looking at improving mobility and public space. Now, when we know transportation is so fundamentally tied to land use, so certainly looking at opportunities for new destinations and critical services. But how do we also add new transportation options, right? The car shares, the bike shares, the new choices that we have to get around. And then how do we take our existing routes and trips that we have, and if we can't change that, how do we at least improve the comfort and efficiency of that route? In public space, of course, we can always add more, and our streets are a fundamental platform for rethinking that geometry. But we can't forget to also look at upgrading and just basic cleaning and maintenance of what we have, and we know that plays a very big role for young children and their caregivers. So what we're in the process of doing is taking the basic user diagrams from the Global Street Design Guide, but breaking up into the more specific elements. What are the pieces and the dimensions that help us achieve safe and accessible walking environments, healthy and comfort? What are the elements? Where do we find vertical, horizontal surfaces in our street to add opportunities for inspiration and education? And how can that come together so that it is sometimes the very basic things of being able to cross a street or create an environment where our kids can play, families can walk on wide, large sidewalks that allow them to enjoy their cities, where mothers can sit and find a moment of shade or rest for breastfeeding. And I'm not going to go through it, but the idea is we're working through this at the moment, and we've just been doing a bunch of workshops, and this is where we'd love to have your guys' input, where we can look at each of these users to understand what mode we're using and how we improve it, right? So that we're not designing our cycle facilities for this guy, but we're designing it for our families. We're designing it for our kids to get around. And, how do we add bike share for kids like in Fortaleza? How do we incorporate education for every kindergarten kid like they do in Copenhagen or in Tirana so that they know how to bike and they become great citizens as bicyclists out in their city? Same thing with transit. We know not only the dedicated space to make our journey more efficient, but the stops, the dwell times are some of the hardest times for caregivers and children. So where are the chances for interaction to allow us to deal with situations like this? Inaccessibility that make life so tough that sometimes people don't want to leave their homes. Or families have to battle off with moving buses in the street. So simple things like accessible boarding, elements of fun like we see in the bus stops in Montreal or Baltimore. And the idea, again, like the Global Street Design Guide, and these are all initial drafts, but how do we take the existing environments and show people what's possible in terms of transformations, right? Based off real-life case studies like this one from a recent street transformation in Copenhagen, where trampolines and renewable energy and seating are in the space and speeds are lowered. Or take areas where we can prioritize transit, but rethink the central spaces of our streets, like they're doing in Tel Aviv or in Bogota. And sometimes even the smaller moves, where we just reduce the speeds, provide a moment to sit down, a bit of shade, a bit of access to nature on the street corner, like we're seeing in Fortaleza with simple things like raised crossings and sidewalk extensions. They're also being able to show through evidence that they're reducing speeds at the same time. So for us, this is the beginning of a process. We're in it. We are already using these strategies in the projects that we're doing around the world, whether it's safe routes to school in São Paulo, and I know we have folk here from the city government in São Paulo, or rethinking car parks in Bogota so that kids now have a place to learn how to ride a bicycle and feel more confident in doing that. Also in Fortaleza, large transformations that not only make it safer and reduce speeds, but actually bring people together so that we see that families can spend time, that kids can come out and play. And what's happened with these pilot projects is the city is now looking at making permanent policy change because 90% of the population, or the people there, I should say, have voted to keep this and make it permanent. And I'll close by showing you one in Milan because we were there last Saturday launching these plaza projects with Jeanette and her team. Again, looking at these spaces that are literally just storing cars. And what's kind of funny, I trained as an architect, and I teach, and you see these Photoshop renderings, right, that students put up, and the kid with the balloon and the butterflies and the old people and the young people and the babies. And it's almost too much, and you're like, no one's going to believe it. Take out the kid with the balloon. But this really was like that. It was crazy. We walked there and like, man, everybody's playing, and, the elderly folk are sitting there, and, kids are on the ground. And it was just quite a phenomenal reminder of how simply we can do this, how we can rethink our streets, getting, so that people feel comfortable bringing out the youngest of children's to their cities, people with various abilities. And we know in a lot of cases our caregivers are our elderly folk, or people with disabilities as well. I don't know if this is going to work, but this was a hilarious moment where you see it, and this was a little programmed because of the launch, but the elderly folk are thrilled because they're dancing, the little kids don't care, they're running around having a blast. And just how, literally 72 hours before that space was storing empty metal boxes. Right? So we hope that by designing for kids and with kids, that we can help to inspire a next generation of safe and sustainable street heroes. And, I use this slide sometimes, and I was so excited on Sunday at the Ciclovia that I actually saw one of the first ones. This little, Supergirl with her cape, and I just couldn't believe it. I was so excited. So we know we're on the right track, but we've got a long way to go, and we really do rely on a lot of folk like you guys here in this room to make sure that we're designing our streets that put kids first. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Skye. That was awesome. Such a good reminder of really what's at stake, but also the incredible opportunities for balloons and transformation. I love it. It's awesome. So next, I'd like to bring the conversation right here to Los Angeles, where LA DOT is inspiring people to think differently about streets with Ciclovia and Celebrate LA, and then channeling that enthusiasm into citywide initiatives that transform streets and public spaces. So I'm honored to introduce Monique Earle, the Assistant General Manager of Administration and Field Operations at LA DOT. She's joining us today to share the story of LA's Play Streets, a program that partners with communities to design interventions that reclaim streets for civic life and play. But Monique is also one of the key leaders of the LA DOT team who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to make this conference happen. So please join me in giving her a special round of applause as we welcome her to the stage.
I would bust a freestyle. There we are. There we are. As soon as I said that, don't hold me to it. Again, hey NACTO family. How's everyone doing? Welcome to LA. Thank you all for being here. I say NACTO family because this conference is slowly but surely becoming one of my favorite conferences because it reminds me of a family reunion. And just like a family reunion, we're all gonna go to church. I'm gonna take you all to church right now. So do me a favor, turn to your neighbor and say, neighbor. Oh, neighbor, come on, engineers. Oh, neighbor. Streets are for kids. Turn to your other neighbor and say, playing is fun. Absolutely, that's what it is, that's what it's about, and that's what my favorite co-presenters have talked to you about earlier. Skye and Cecilia, thank you for your wonderful presentation. I'm gonna talk to you a little bit about, excuse me, is this the clicker here? This looks unique. The green button, thank you. We're gonna just flow with this, y'all, hold on. We're going to get this right. So we're going to talk a little bit about Play Streets, and I'm excited to be at LADOT, where Play Streets is one of our premier programs, and many thanks to Salita Reynolds. Salita, where are you at? There you are. Salita, thank you so much for bringing this idea to us. So growing up at my house, there were 3 things that were certain on a Saturday morning, and some of you can relate. We did chores. Anyone did chores on a Saturday morning? Back in the day, kids don't do chores anymore. It's okay. We watched Soul Train. Soul Train came on at 11 o'clock, and we watched Soul Train, and I had to watch Soul Train before I went outside to play until the street lights came on. Absolutely. So that was a common thing in many communities around the world. Play shapes who we are at every age. Play is important for our behavioral development, our cognition, and problem solving for children. Tag and hide and go seek are true problem solving activities, as well as it reduces stress, anxiety, and depression for adults. And at some point, something changed. Our play, according to this, went missing. And so many of you, like me, grew up in the 70s and 80s, and you may remember a certain milk carton campaign. And there were missing children. And with that campaign came a lot of anxieties in families because it brought something that was a fear, and it brought it to our front doors and into our living rooms, and a lot of parents began to restrict play for their kids. It certainly became real in my household. And so we now have evidence that suggests our children are more safe now than ever. And the question we want to answer is, does a DOT have a role in re-inspiring play? So the County of Los Angeles a few years ago, the county park system did a study of access to parks. And the highest concentration of red all fall within the city of Los Angeles boundaries. And it illustrates that many of the areas that are in need are park poor. As a DOT, we certainly do not have authority over parks. We do, however, control the number of streets that are in our city. And streets make up somewhere in the tune of about 15% of the land mass in our fair city. It's the largest single public asset, as Sky mentioned, that the city controls, and we think about how to change the built environment around us. Our streets provide that great opportunity. So at LADOT, we took a look at areas that were really in need of play for their children, and these were the areas that were uniquely park poor. And so how do we bring a Play Streets program into communities that is thoughtful, well-designed, and brings dignity to the people that we serve without stoking fear of gentrification and displacement, which is very real? And the way that you do that is by talking to the people that live there. We partnered with the community organizations, we partnered with stakeholders and neighborhood leaders to understand what they wanted to see from a Play Streets program. And over the course of a year, we took a broad definition of what play means and worked with the community to define how, when, and where they wanted to see play in their communities. We tested a few different versions of the program, different times of day, different kinds of equipment, evening events, shade structures versus jump ropes, repeating events over several occasions or doing it one time only, also bringing performers into the spaces versus no scheduled activities. And in total, we scientifically tested play in 5 neighborhoods over 7 events. The lessons were really stark. We had to take a real thoughtful approach to play if we wanted to make this program work, inspire ownership from the community, and this was in order to improve health outcomes and community cohesion. Now, another really important aspect of the Phase 1 pilot was building capacity within the city family. There were not a lot of people in the city family that were truly on board with this program because of the risks, the liability that was associated, permitting fees, different things in terms of safety. And so we knew we had to work very closely with our city partners in order to make this an event that could be owned by the community and a program that could be owned by the community. We miss out on incredible opportunities for community building and social cohesion and all the joys that come with creating the public space when we worry about those things over what good it does for the community. So with these lessons, it became really clear in phase 1 that LADOT needed to fall back. We needed to take a step back and decide to relaunch the Play Streets program with an express goal that Play Streets has to become something that is owned by the communities, that they can pick up the materials that they need and execute this program on their own with as little interaction from the city as possible. Ownership is key. And so we used the research to help inform what would become the physical elements of the street. So inside the box of play that you see here is everything you need to close down a street, including A-frames that tell drivers that they can't enter the space, movable, customizable equipment called wobbles. You remember the wobbles from the reception the other night. And shade structures, which we heard over and over again, that was such an important and missing convenience in these communities. So the wobbles were a central part of this program. The equipment is incredibly lightweight and versatile, even for the inebriated, because I did see some folks the other night. No judgment, no judgment. And we find that anyone who comes to a Play Streets event, young and old, are inspired to make wobbles what they need them to be. They can be used like horses and seesaws. They can be clicked together like an obstacle course or stacked together to make a fortress. You can also attach accessories like umbrellas, tables, and more so that people of all ages can enjoy the wobbles. Finding a creative way to completely transform the street is only a part of our challenge. It's also really important that the Play Street program improves outcome for our communities. I want to close with stressing the importance of the Play Streets program being owned by the community. Earlier this month, I attended a Play Streets event in Little Tokyo. And Play Streets is what it is. All the things that I mentioned, all the photos that you saw, these were things that happen at a Play Streets event every time. What is unexpected and where the magic happens is when you have two teenage kids with Michael Jordan tennis shoes, donning a dinosaur suit, running out to the street and making the event their own. They didn't ask our permission. They didn't have to. It was their neighborhood, their community, their Play Street. Thank you.
Thank you, Monique. That was awesome. It's amazing to learn from LA the lessons from an iterative pilot to really build that sense of community ownership. So thank you for that. So if you were at Celebrate LA on Sunday, you may have seen the free pedicab rides sponsored by AARP. Did anyone see those? Yeah, it was awesome, which it really made the day's activities much more accessible for people of all ages and abilities. So I'm honored to introduce the woman behind that idea, Stephanie Ramirez. She's the Associate State Director of Advocacy at AARP Los Angeles. Stephanie leads AARP California's transportation-related efforts to address the mobility needs of older adults and persons with disabilities to support an age-friendly Los Angeles. She serves on the Community Advisory Committee for the Los Angeles Vision Zero Alliance, the City of Los Angeles Sidewalk Repair Program and Vision Zero Task Force, and she's on the Metro Los Angeles Policy Advisory Council. Please join me in welcoming Stephanie to the stage.
I'm not going to touch that. Thank you so much. This is really a privilege for me to be here. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, so having you all get to celebrate Los Angeles and also get to celebrate the incredible diversity that we have, and hopefully you guys got to taste great food, visit amazing neighborhoods. And so I'm here to talk about why older adults want to play too, and why they deserve a say in how streets are designed. My presentation is going to have a bunch of these vibrant pictures that are all photographs of real members and work that's happening in Los Angeles that is led by myself, but also in support of my colleagues at the ARP California State Office, our colleagues at the national office, and a lot of the folks that are actually sitting here too that represent stakeholders from the local community. I see a lot of you here. And so it's great to walk you through of why AARP is interested in this. And I forgot that you guys are not moving these. So why does AARP have a stake in this? Why is AARP working on making sure that we have livable communities for people of all ages? Well, we have a definition. If you don't know, AARP advocates for the well-being of the 50 plus and their families, and we want to ensure that folks are living in safe and secure communities, that places that have appropriate and affordable housing, transportation, and supportive community features and services. And so if a community member wants to decide that, hey, I live in a great neighborhood and I want to stay where I'm at, how do we make this possible? So if you don't know, we have entered a time where our demographics are changing. So in 2010, people aged 65 and up made 15% of the population. By 2030, it's going to be 20%. And so how are we ensuring that we are designing communities, transportation, community service that is going to make sure that this population has accessibility, that it has what it needs to be able to age in place and age with dignity? So we do a lot of surveys at AARP with our members and with the public. And 78% of our members say they want to stay in their homes. This is the homes, whether it's a home, apartment, but homes are not designed to allow for that. Currently, we have folks that, and there's different initiatives that tell us every time, how do we have places that are going to be able to allow for the different types of mobility that we might change, that our life might change, but we currently don't have that. And so how do members also stay in their communities? A high percentage of our members want to be able to stay in the neighborhoods that maybe they grew up in. I know that I've talked to members in Whittier, that's a suburb in Los Angeles County. They grew up there, they left in their teenage years, started having families, and came back because that's where they wanted to stay for the rest of their lives. And so how do we allow for that? And I'll tell you a great story about this lady who actually went to Ciclavia. That's her painting a picture of our founder, Dr. Ethel Percy Andrus. She actually was the first female principal in the state of California, and she began the organization in her 60s. We're actually celebrating our 60th anniversary of founding of AARP this year. And so as you can see from this list, what are the amenities that older adults need to be able to stay in their homes? And you see the top one. I know we talked a lot about rail here in Los Angeles, but our members are saying we want a bus stop. These are the things that are going to enable us to be able to get to social connection activities, to be able to visit with friends, to be able to go to the doctor, to where they need to go in order to have the life that they want to live. And so we're going to be releasing pretty shortly a study with UCLA where we looked at the transportation patterns of low-income adults here in Los Angeles, and bus stops were, and bus and walking were the #1 ways, and they were moving about in the city. And so this is a little glimpse of our work. We have the opportunity here in Los Angeles to really engage our membership around transportation. So you see the woman to your left riding a bicycle. This was the first time that she had ridden in about 25 years. And she said, I never even knew that I was gonna get on a bike again, let alone bike in the streets of downtown LA. And so how do we get a woman who, again, is trying to relive that play that we just heard about in her presentations, and really understand how those infrastructures and those features are helping her be able to age in place, to be able to allow her to have safety if she wants to be able to walk down her neighborhood and not be scared that cars are going so fast. And so those are the conversations that we're trying to have with our members. I'm not saying that it's easy. We have a lot of members that maybe don't want these things in their communities, but we're able to frame it in a way to understand how they all impact age-friendly and livable communities. We also have a partnership with Metro, and I know that we have Therese McMillan here. Metro does a great program. It's called the On the Move Riders program. Well, they train older adults to utilize public transportation. And these are a lot of individuals that maybe haven't ridden a bus in a really long time, or maybe don't even know how to utilize the train system. I know that my grandmother has never learned to drive when she came from Nicaragua in the 80s, and basically relied on public transportation to get to her job. And when she retired, she still utilized the bus to get to wherever she needed to go. Never once had she ever ridden a train. And we took her to the Hollywood Farmers Market, and she was like, wow, I had no idea. And so we get to do these rides with our members to help them discover places within their backyard, and also discover new places in their communities. And we have this amazing opportunity for intergenerational activities, and also have peer-to-peer learning. So Metro's program actually has volunteers that then go and plan monthly trips with older adults, so they can go to the museum. They're going to all these exciting places that actually I've never even been to. And one of them was Ciclavia on Sunday. And so ARP does this work through its network of age-friendly communities. A couple of years ago, we had the great fortune that there was leadership here in the city and county of Los Angeles that decided that they wanted to address the growing need of the aging population. And so the city and the county of Los Angeles enrolled in ARP's network. The initiative is called Purposeful Aging. And so we have been able to work with leadership in the city and the county to get a plan in place that's going to address in the next 3 to 5 years, the opportunity to do some work in some of these, what we call the 8 domains of livability. So the city and county of Los Angeles is focusing on transportation, housing, and they added a domain around emergency preparedness, with actually a lot of our members member cities have been wanting to add. But this work is happening not just here in LA, but across the country, again, to ensure that we are working to address the needs of older adults at a local level. And so we have this opportunity, again, to engage our members on what they need. And here in LA, their needs are very clear. It's housing and transportation. We hear it over and over again. Where am I going to live with housing costs rising, and how do I get there? And it's interesting, we like to use these images. I don't know if, for those of you who went to Ciclavia, if you saw the skateboarding grandma. That's Swiel. And so, you know, we see these images of older adults, and not to say that there isn't issues of mobility and how our mobility changes as we're aging. We're all going to experience that. We all experience it at different times in our lives. But each generation is redefining aging. And so I put these pictures, and I want to say Swiel's story. I know Ciclavia as an organization has really embraced her as an ambassador because she's she is able to tell the story of what she needs and what she is able to have in terms of a community where she still feels that she can play and be a kid and experience something different. And so, again, all these features are not working in silos. All of them are interconnected. We use a framework that was organized by the World Health Organization to really think of the intersections between housing, transportation, open parks. Not any different than what we have heard that works for children. Again, this is work that can benefit people of all ages. And so I close, I know that Corinne mentioned the pedicabs. I usually end my presentations with a picture of my grandmother and my mother, because some of the things that I like to incorporate in my work, and we had this conversation quite a bit through this conference. In 2016, we asked our members to support Measure M. And a lot of the projects that are listed are very far along, where some of our members said, why should I support this? I might not be alive when I get this, when you guys get this done. And so I say that because that's really important when you're engaging older adults we need their input. In order to design a transportation system or any community service that's going to benefit an older adult or people of all ages, we need their input now. And if we're able to solve that and get their input, then the next generation doesn't have to keep having those same challenges. And so the way that I put it, at least for me personally, if I'm able to design a system for my grandmother, then my mother doesn't have the same difficulty as my grandmother using the buses and the trains. And then when I'm their age, fortunately, if I get there, then I won't have that same experience too. And so again, as we're talking about why play in streets are important for kids, older adults matter too. And it's not just older adults with mobility challenges, because they're important too, but again, aging is changing. It's not the same. And so we want to ensure that we're accounting for that disruption as we're planning for communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you for that great perspective on intergenerational planning and conversations and the really important considerations as we all age. So next, I'm delighted to introduce our final speaker, James Siegel, who's the CEO of Kaboom, the national nonprofit that seeks to give children the childhood they deserve, filled with balanced and active play so they can thrive. James is here today to share a vision of a future where kids' zip codes don't determine the opportunities they have to play. And in the spirit of, that we're all aging, I also want to add, I think it's especially notable that Kaboom's website features pictures of all of their staff from when they were kids, which I think is really fun and also a very poignant reminder that we were all kids once, and we retain our childlike wonder as we age throughout life's stages. So please join me in welcoming James Siegel to talk about the Play Everywhere concept and how it seeks to turn everyday spaces like bus stops and sidewalks into opportunities for play.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to be with you all today. And I promise to get to the fun stuff, because what's more fun than kids playing? But I actually want to start on a serious note, because as Monique shared, play is serious business. It's the fundamental building block of childhood development: physical, social, emotional, cognitive, and creative. And I think we have the same childhood, Monique, because I remember playing until the sun went down, but the problem is today's generation of kids are playing less than any generation before them. And the idea of playing until the sun goes down is now relegated to a book that you can read to your kids to tell them about the good old days. And our vision of what kids' childhood is more like this, with kids' faces in screens dominating their childhood experience. But to get even more serious, when we're talking about kids growing up in under-resourced communities, we're talking about kids growing up in poverty, they have additional challenges that lead to significant adversity in their lives and stress, and the built environment doesn't help because they're often facing communities that don't have anywhere to play. And that's why Kaboom exists. We've built over 3,000 play spaces all across the country, including many here in the LA area. And for us, it's all about addressing inequity in the built environment to enable kids to play. And the way we do it is by elevating community leadership in the process, starting with the kids themselves. So you see here a kid at one of our design days designing their dream playground. And we take their inspiration to build a unique play space for them. And then we rally the community behind them, barn raising style. Hundreds of volunteers from all walks of life coming together in common purpose to build a playground in a single day to demonstrate what's possible, that change is really possible in communities that have faced too many empty promises over the years, and to demonstrate to kids that they're valued and that they're loved. And the result is smiling, joyful faces that tell you that there's something right going on. Unfortunately, though, this is not the norm. And I want to be clear, kids are not the problem. It's not that kids want to do something else. Look at the data. 71% would rather move than do something in front of a screen. 73% would choose a zip line or a super slide over a video game. The problem is us. The problem is that we've made it too hard for kids to play. And a few years ago, we set out to try to figure out what the key roadblocks were and how to overcome them. And we enlisted the aid of an organization called Ideas 42, which uses behavioral science to address social challenges at scale. And we asked them, what are the key roadblocks? And they had two really important insights for us. And the first was that you can go through the whole day and not even think about play for your kids. So unlike nutrition, where everywhere you go, grocery store, out to eat, open up the refrigerator at home, you're confronted with a choice between the healthy option and the unhealthy option, and behavioral scientists can take that moment and default you to the healthy option. There are no natural moments during the day where you're forced to think about play for your kids. And then, even if you do think about it, all the little hassle factors get in the way. Think about what it takes to go to the local playground, even if it's only a half a mile away. Do you have the right clothes on? Do you have the right supplies with you? Is there a safe way to get there? And when you get there, perhaps most importantly, is there a clean bathroom that you can use when someone inevitably has an emergency? And then you're tired from playing, you trudge back home, and you have to get back to the 20 other things on your to-do list. And all these little hassle factors add up to make it too easy for parents or other caregivers to say, you know what, sorry, now's not the time to go play. So if those are the challenges, we then asked Ideas 42 to help us think through what can cities do to overcome these roadblocks? And they had a simple but profound answer. And the answer was, we need to integrate play everywhere into the daily lives and routines of kids and families. And for today's purposes, I want to focus on two main areas. The first, not surprisingly, streets, sidewalks, and trails. Imagine if they became play spaces. And I'm going to walk you through just a couple of examples to show you what's possible. City of Miami had a problem with dead-end streets, site of illegal dumping and other illicit activity. And they transformed the dead-end streets with local artists into vibrant places to play. And the sad part of the story was that the kids actually did not know how to do hopscotch. But the grandparents came out, and they taught them. And all of a sudden, you have this great, vibrant, intergenerational space happening that's become a gathering hub for the community with paint on a dead-end street. And we found out later, unintended consequence, it's now the local hotspot for picnic dates. Who would have thought? Or the Brightmoor neighborhood of Detroit, dilapidated sidewalk that we see in many neighborhoods across the country, transformed into a racetrack with a solar-powered speedometer so the kids could see how fast they're going and want to keep doing it. Or Charlotte, a rail trail that did not have many amenities for families, They created a beautiful musical play spot along the way to entice families to come out and to linger and spend time there. The other key area, obviously, transit and transit hubs. What if these became great places for kids to play? In Lexington, Kentucky, downtown bus depot, hub and spoke model, so everyone has to go downtown to transfer out to somewhere else. Thousands of people coming through, many with kids in tow, with nothing to do. They took a wall and made it into a mini playground. And not only were kids playing more, but it also drew the kids away from the bus traffic to make it safer for everyone. We've all seen bus stops become swing sets. I think that's going to become the new normal. But how about a slide from a public building up top in Knoxville, Tennessee, down to a bus stop below? That looks like a fun way to get to the bus stop. And yes, adults use it too. Or in Decatur, Georgia, area under an overpass that feels really dark, really foreboding, create a vibrant play space underneath while people are waiting for transit. These are not just beautiful places that enhance the community, they're driving real outcomes. Kids are playing more, which we know is good for their development, and communities are building social cohesion because people are interacting around something in common, families, kids, that break down barriers between us. And people are feeling safer from traffic and also from neighborhood crime. And that becomes a virtuous cycle because what we learned through this evaluation process, and we partnered with Gale, the global design firm, on this, is that if you create great places for kids and families, their presence in the space then contributes to the safety of the space going forward. LA is at the vanguard of this as well, and we're in the process of implementing 10 Play Everywhere projects throughout LA. Many of you may have seen one of the ones that's in progress through the walking tours this week. And I just want to quickly point out, too, because they're simple but create a profound transformation, things that can be replicated easily. This is the public library in Watts, and it doesn't look like a welcoming place for kids, but all it takes is a little play, and all of a sudden you bring the magic of the library out onto the street and entice people in. And our partner, Keurig Dr. Pepper, was critical to our ability to spread these ideas here in LA. And this second one, Kester Elementary School, where they had a challenge with getting kids to walk to school because it didn't feel safe and it didn't feel welcoming. And so what they did was they got local artists to do these amazing chalk renderings on the sidewalk. They then memorialized those as banners, put them all across the fence, and the best part is this is continuing to evolve because they encourage the kids to create their own magic with chalk every single day, to prompt them to play with each other and with their families. And it didn't stop here because this one is already being replicated because they shared the idea of Walk the K from Kester Elementary with a school in Houston that had suffered from Hurricane Harvey. And what you see here is kids being exposed to the idea of Walk the K, then being able to implement it on their own terms in their own community. And as you can tell from what I think is a jumping broccoli, the kids appreciated the effort of the local artist here in LA and are really thrilled about taking it to Houston. And all this is to say that these are ideas that can spread quickly. And for all of you who are already doing this in your community, thank you and please do more. And for those of you who have not yet had the opportunity to do it, please join us on this journey, because the reality is, if we want a generation of healthy kids, it's all of our collective responsibility, and we all have a role to play. And together, I believe that we can create an environment where all kids, particularly kids growing up in poverty, get the childhood that they deserve filled with play. Thank you very much.